Hi guys, my name is Vanessa Smedley and I'm a painter. Today we are going to paint this nice little fall still life right here because I thought it would be a great idea to show you how to paint clear glass because that can be a very tricky thing to paint. So let's do this! Here's your materials for today. Go ahead and pause and screenshot, or they're also listed in the description of the video for you. I'm starting out by using masking fluid to block out these foreground items because they're very, very detailed and I don't want to have to paint around them. There's a lot of artists that won't use this much masking fluid, but I have literally never had a problem with it, so I just use as much as I want to. But of course, I always use cotton paper. If you're using a pulp paper, you might not want to use this much because it could rip your paper. Just don't forget to dip your brush into liquid dish soap before dipping it into the masking fluid, or you will ruin your brush. I always have to say that. I start out with Indigo Blue and I add a little bit of Quinacridone Magenta to it to add a little bit of a purple tone. Then I wet the entire cloth area of the background and begin to drop this indigo in there. As it goes along, I drop in thicker and thicker consistencies in the shadow areas of the cloth and just spray it and allow it to spread. Now that I've allowed that to dry completely, I come back in, re-wet it, and do one more layer because it dried too light for me. Next, I mix some lemon yellow with some cadmium free yellow to make that kind of halfway in the middle between those two colors. And then I've got a pool of yellow ochre and I mix some burnt umber with some Payne's gray. I let that background dry and I removed all of the masking fluid off camera. You're welcome. And I'm beginning to paint all of these little petals. So I start out by painting them section by section. I'm using the lemon yellow and the cadmium free yellow mix, and then I am adding more detail in with the yellow ochre. I mix up some raw sienna and some burnt umber together to make it kind of a medium brown, and then I'm going to use that for this table. I start out by wetting with clean water the entire area of the table, and then I begin dropping in raw sienna to the right, and then my mix of raw sienna and burnt umber kind of in the middle, and then getting darker with more burnt umber to the left. Then I come back in with a darker mixture of burnt umber and Payne's gray, and I begin adding in some of that wood grain texture and some of those really dark shadows. Then I take the sharp side of my cut in half store card and I begin to scratch in some of that wood grain detail. It's also called scoring. Then I use burnt umber to fill in the disc florets, which is the middle part of this flower. I did have to look that up, but anyway. Then I use a little bit of Sap Green to do these green parts, whatever they're called. I couldn't find that one. Next, I'm using more masking fluid to mask out the highlights on the bottle and the detailings on the book. Now, when it comes to the book title, I'm really just scribbling something in. It's not actual letters. Next, we're going to work on this little book. So I start out with Alizarin Crimson, add burnt umber, and then add a little bit of Winsor Violet, which is the same thing as Dioxazine Purple. First, I use my number 12 round brush to wet the entire top of the book and the side, and then I drop in that color that I just mixed. But I'm making sure to make it darker on the top of the book and lighter on the spine because the light is coming from the right here. Then I add in some darker Payne's gray for that shadow, and then I lift out a little bit of that shine that's coming off of the bottle. Next, I'm going to mix up the colors for the little orange pumpkin. So we start out with Cadmium Free Yellow and then add in some Cadmium Free Red. Then I mix those same exact colors, but then add in some Ultramarine Blue to gray it down. First, I wet the entire area except for the stalk, and then I drop in some lemon yellow in the highlight areas, and then the brighter orange in the medium areas, and then for the shadow areas I use the one that has the ultramarine blue in it. Then I continue to darken the shadows with some burnt sienna and some burnt umber. I apologize for not showing you the mix that I have for this little white pumpkin here, but I used a very watery mix of Sap Green, Payne's Gray, burnt umber, and a little bit of lemon yellow. I mean, it looks white, but it has undertones of all of those colors in it. So I mixed that up and then mixed up a darker version of it, of the same color, added a little bit more burnt umber for the shadow areas. And here I added just a little bit of that book color because it's reflecting off the book back into the pumpkin, just a little bit. And here I chucked in just a little bit of watery Payne's Gray and a tiny little bit of burnt umber for the pages. And here I'm adding in the stem of this flower really quick. I did not wet this, I wanted it to mainly stay put, so I've added in a little bit of Sap Green and then sprayed it just a tiny little bit to make the edges blur. It's time to make all of these objects appear like they are grounded to this table rather than floating up in space. So I'm adding a very dark mix of burnt umber and Payne's Gray and adding in the shadows here. And then I take just a little bit of clean water around the edges and blend it into the table. I very often harp on the fact that really dark shadows is what makes something have a three-dimensional effect, and in this case it is definitely true, because once I get those shadows in, then it starts to come alive. Especially if you're talking about something that is as dramatically lit as this, with very, very bright brights and very, very dark darks, kind of like a Caravaggio type feel. I don't know if I got quite that dark, but that's kind of the classical look that I was going for. Okay, here we go. I did promise to show you how to do clear glass, so this is the first step. You want to wet the entire area that you're going to do. This time I'm leaving the stem out, and I am going to start dropping in the colors of the table and then the color of the curtain behind. When you're painting clear glass, that's really all you want to do. You just want to paint the colors that are behind the glass in kind of a generalized way, because the glass is going to distort whatever's behind it. So you just want to get the colors in there and have them meld together, and then you just lift out the highlights like I'm doing right here. So this bottle actually has kind of a weird shape. It's actually a maple syrup bottle, so it's a little bit hard to portray. It has rounded edges, but it's a flat, kind of squashed bottle. So if you think it looks kind of odd, that's why. It's a weird bottle and it's at an angle. So, I mean, just for what it's worth. It actually had a little round handle at the top of the bottle that I just kind of removed. I didn't feel like that was a necessary detail. That first layer has already dried, but it dried too light for me, so I'm coming back in and I wet the whole area again, and I am just darkening up some of these areas. Then I come in with a darker consistency of the red on the book, and I just make that darker. I have added a little bit of Payne's Gray and Burnt Umber to my yellow mix, and I'm coming back in and doing the darker shadows on these petals. I'm using clean water to soften the edges. Now I'm bringing in a darker consistency of the Payne's Gray and Burnt Umber mix to do all these little details. I also scratched in some highlights with my little store card that I cut in half. Still not dark enough to suit me, so here's a third coat. And now we're removing that masking fluid from the highlights. Here I am knocking back that white on the book with some yellow ochre. I've mixed up a darker consistency of my Sap Green, Payne's Gray, Burnt Umber, and Lemon Yellow here, and I'm using this for the dark side of the moon. No, just kidding. This little white pumpkin. And now I've mixed up a really nice dark orange here with the cadmium yellow, cadmium red, and ultramarine, and I added a little bit of burnt umber as well. And here I'm making another round of darkening everything up that I feel like needs to be darker. I'm kind of almost like the cook in Alice in Wonderland, shouting for more pepper all the time, but for me it's more shadow, more darker. Okay, back to the glass. So those very, very white highlights, I am now just knocking some of the edges back with a little bit of that indigo mix so that it's not quite so hard edged. You know how that masking fluid can be so very hard edged. That's not like a look that you really want here, so I'm softening the edges of these things. And then I'm adding a few dark streaks. You'll also see that kind of thing in glass. You just have to really look at your subject and paint what you see. And another round of shadows on the petals. I told you I'm never satisfied with how dark things are. And then as a final touch, I'm using a little bit of white soft pastel for the larger areas and blend that in just a little bit. And then I use a white pastel pencil for the fine lines. And I use a yellow pastel pencil for the edge of some of these petals. And then as a final touch, I'm using a little bit of white pastel pencil for highlights. And here's the finished product with the tape removed and everything finished and signed. And there you have it, a nice little still life where you now know how to paint clear glass. I really hope you give it a shot yourself. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all of that stuff, because I really would love to grow this channel, and that's the way to do it. So, thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.